Let's recap the NATO summit in Ankara with our first guest, journalist and international affairs commentator Alexei Pechi. Alexei, hello.
Hello, I'm glad to be here.
Likewise. Alexei, what is the main outcome that NATO achieved at the summit in Ankara? Was it really a summit of unity, cohesion, and determination, or, as the BBC writes, a summit of mixed feelings?
Well, I would say it was a summit of mixed feelings, but still mostly positive feelings, especially for Europe. Because at this summit, it seemed that Donald Trump, the American president, was finally the person he always wanted to be. As he joked, he said, "I'm the boss here." Remember at the G7 summit, he made that joke? And now it looked more or less the same because Europe has finally taken full responsibility for its own defense. No one is hiding this anymore. Europeans are adopting their own defense budgets. Europeans are restarting their military industrial complex. And the Americans are becoming a bit more on the sidelines of all this. That is, of course, we're talking about the fact that the Americans, for example, still maintain their nuclear umbrella over Europe, but again, not to the full extent. Notice, France and Poland are already holding direct talks. They've finally gotten to this point. Direct talks about France extending its nuclear umbrella to cover Poland as well. Exactly. So basically, unity. I saw unity within Europe and Canada. If you read the final communique regarding Ukraine, even the funding is clearly stated there 140 billion euros. This is probably the first time that the amount of aid from NATO is specified in euros. That is, it says 140 billion euros for 2 years, which Europe and Canada are allocating. But the role of the United States of America, I would say, is not to interfere. Trump wanted to be a facilitator in this war, meaning a negotiator, a moderator. That didn't quite work out. Trump tried to push Ukraine towards something, tried to put pressure, but it didn't work out. And as it seems to me, the main outcome of this summit for Ukraine and for Europe is that Trump stopped interfering. That's how I would describe it. The fact that at the end of the summit, he once again threatened to withdraw all troops from Europe, once again brought up Greenland, and for some reason, once again lashed out at Spain. Well, I would put it this way. I'll try to say this correctly now. The American president kept himself under control for a long time and then just snapped and started the same rhetoric again because he still won't be able to withdraw all the troops from Europe. There is a congressional resolution from 25 which clearly states that he cannot reduce the number of American troops in Europe below the threshold of 76,000 soldiers. Yes, he can't give up the nuclear umbrella. The issue with Tomahawks for Germany has finally been resolved. Now the Germans are simply buying these missiles themselves, instead of the Americans deploying them in Germany. The story with Spain ended with Grandpa Trump shouting, scolding, and in the end, regarding trade, he said, "We're breaking off trade with Spain altogether." But when he returned to Washington, he said, "Well, we don't value the Spanish much, but they are increasing their defense spending, so we won't break off trade." Now, the issue of Greenland. Let me remind you, this goes back to Trump's first presidential term. If you rewind time, he was saying the same things during his first term. Everything was exactly the same. It came to nothing. That's what we came to, and now he's bringing it up again. So I would say it's a plus, a big plus for Europe at this summit. The big plus is that Ankara, Turkey, basically finally, well, you could say, is finally becoming a firm supporter of Ukraine, a clear piece in the security architecture of all of Europe. Erdogan is no longer hiding this. He is making his choice clear. This exchange of S-400 for F-35 is a very clear marker that Russian weapons and ties with Russia are no longer so important that they need to be held on to. Erdogan understands that it's no longer beneficial, or rather, it's only beneficial for Putin if Erdogan maintains any kind of connection with Moscow. It's not like it was 10 years ago when Erdogan was reaching out to Moscow and to the West, choosing this kind of multipolarity. He was trying to be a bridge between the West and Moscow. Now he understands that he's not the one who needs it most. It's Putin who does. That's why he's turning completely toward Trump, supporting his ideas and so on. So, in short, I see more positives from this summit for Europe.
But Alexei, about this not interfering from the United States, Didn't it seem to you that at this summit we actually took a step forward from just not interfering? Because there are licenses for Patriot systems, support for long range strikes, and at first some even interpreted what Rubio said as if we would almost be helping directly, but that was probably just a mistranslation. And then there's the possible no fly zone as a security guarantee. That sounds even more like helping.
Why am I saying that he stepped aside and isn't interfering? Because we've already discussed this on air before. There's such a concept. NATO 3.0, it was actually presented by Marco Rubio during Donald Trump's election campaign. And the idea is that, by the way, I think Mark Rutte recently talked about it again. That is supposedly a stronger Europe within a stronger NATO. When I say that Trump is supportive and doesn't interfere, I mean that he doesn't put obstacles in the way, he provides tools. Notice this. The funding is zero, and they are trying as much as possible to reduce their spending on Europe's defense capability, but at the same time, they are giving Europe the tools. Take, for example, the production license for Patriot systems. Notice he says directly, so you won't complain later that we didn't give you enough. Take the license, produce, go ahead. We're just not interfering in this. It's the same story with the license Germany received. Germany actually received this Patriot license earlier, but for a long time they didn't produce these missiles. Why? And by the way, there's a funny situation there. The problem wasn't that they didn't have production capacity there, but because there were no orders. That was the problem, because the Americans outbid them and they set the conditions so that first we produce and sell, and then maybe you. There were no orders. Now, Germany will. Right now, many people are saying that yes, Ukraine will have its own domestically produced Patriots, God willing, in 2 or 3 years. Maybe that's true. Maybe it will be faster. I don't want to speculate on this topic, but what is already known is that Germany will produce Patriot missiles for Ukraine at its own facilities while Ukraine sets up its own production. That's not interfering. That's why I say Trump, he got exactly the role the boss wanted. He gives the tools and says, that's it, take care of your own defense. The Europeans agreed to this and accepted these rules of the game. They take the tools. Those tools are American and they work with them. Pay attention, for example, to these airborne early warning aircraft. Here are the AWACS used by the entire NATO bloc. They have always been American. These are Boeing aircraft. What was announced at this NATO summit? That Europe is ordering 10 new aircraft from Sweden, from the company Saab. So even in this matter, they are switching to their own aviation. Gradually, step by step, Europe is becoming completely self-reliant, no matter how that sounds. At the same time, the Americans are still there. America isn't going anywhere. It's a huge mistake to think that the Americans are leaving Europe, withdrawing their troops, taking away their weapons, and so on. No. The concept of NATO 3.0 is that Europe, which got used to this after World War II, and the Americans basically imposed this model on them that you develop your economy and we'll protect you. And that's how Europe lived for many decades. But the time has come when Europe not only needs to develop its economy, but also to defend itself. And let's also be honest and objective. Well, relying only on the armed forces of the United States of America in a situation where you have aggressive Russia right next door, which is already carrying out sabotage and provocations on European territory, would be very foolish. Very foolish. But the Europeans needed to be pushed toward this somehow, just to explain that there is a Russian threat. Unfortunately, not everyone knows about it. Not all Europeans believe in it. And this is shown by the right-wing forces that exist in every European country, who suddenly start saying that we should be friends and cooperate with the Russians again. For this, you can take Donald Trump, who will say that either you defend yourselves or we will leave and abandon you one-on-one with Russia. This motivates, this works. You see the defense budgets, you see that Europeans have started investing in their own defense industries, allocating real money. And notice, the Americans don't just give out production licenses for no reason either. If you look closely, Michael Waltz, I think, said this. If I'm not mistaken, who is the U.S. representative to NATO? He's Matthew Whitaker. He recently, yes, Matthew Whitaker, yes, said that yes, not... Matthew Whitaker recently said that the Europeans have started allocating large amounts of money to their own defense industry. There is a big risk that now, with all this money, they will actually buy only European weapons. What will happen to the American defense industry, which has sold weapons to Europe for decades? That's why they issue licenses, that's why production is being moved, and so on, in order to stay within this structure and also remain in this market, to keep making money in this market as well. So, to sum up again, When I say that Trump steps back and doesn't interfere, it doesn't mean that he's gone and nowhere to be seen. No, he's exactly the kind of boss who gives you the tools and says, here, take them, do your work. The Europeans take them and get to work. In our situation, in Ukraine's situation, this is a super ideal approach. If Trump doesn't want to provide funding, if he doesn't want to give aid and so on, okay, just give us the tools and step aside. We'll handle the rest ourselves and pay attention. This is the last thing I'll say. For the past year, well, more than a year, yes, and Trump noticed this too when he met with Zelensky. He says to compare the situation in February in the Oval Office in 2025 and the situation now, well, it's just incomparable. And Trump admits this. He says, back then there were no cards, but now there are cards. What caused their appearance? Again, I'll be cynical, but Ukraine got them as a result of Trump being busy with the war against Iran. And at that time, Europe was setting up its own system, its own frame of reference, its own connections, its own vision, and its own security architecture. And we've reached a point where now Trump says Ukraine has got the cards. And that's why we see the moment when he says, yes, strikes on Moscow are, of course, an escalation, but it's the kind of escalation that could lead to the end of the war.
Yes, but this concept of not interfering when it comes to Europe, I think it works a little differently here. The thing is, the goal that Europe is moving toward, yes, the right goal that you mentioned, that's still a few years away. The Europeans themselves say this. So today, you see, Europe is not fully ready yet. Today, probably as of today, yes, for Europe, it would probably be better to use an approach where Trump helps. Why am I saying this? I'm referring to the recent surge in intelligence warnings, including from NATO countries, about possible Russian provocations against the Baltic states and Poland. In Lithuania, the American military just left for rotation, and the new group hasn't arrived yet. In this regard, if something happens here on NATO's eastern flank, will Trump defend and help?
I think he will. And what immediately comes to my mind is the recent episode involving Poland. There was a situation there, if you remember, when an armored brigade was sent for rotation, and the US Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, said, let's withdraw this brigade, remove it, and in general, there's no need to deploy anyone to Poland. And if you believe the American media and Trump's own statement, when he found out about this, the American president said that you can't treat the Poles like that. You can't treat friends from Poland that way. He met with Karol Nawrocki, and as a result, that armored brigade returned there. You know, I would probably take any political statements with a grain of salt. Now, the brigade, well, let's put it this way. Do we really know the exact rotation dates of this brigade in Lithuania? Well, I can't take responsibility and say that I know. Maybe it's a fairly reasonable and normal process within NATO to withdraw the brigade from Lithuania. To withdraw, maybe somewhere the contingent is increasing in, let's say, Romania, I emphasize hypothetically speaking, and in 3 months, there will be even more troops in Lithuania. Or we can imagine a situation where the American brigade is withdrawn from Lithuania, but who is transferred there instead? The German brigade. Can we imagine that?
Yes, we can. The German brigade is being transferred there anyway. Actually, yes. No, the German brigade is being transferred there according to the plan anyway. Well, there you go.
So it's hard to say that the US is just withdrawing its troops and so on. We're talking about episodes. We're talking about specific situations. Yes, indeed. If you look at the episodes, it does look like the Americans are leaving. Americans, let's put it this way. America is business. It's business as usual, as Angela Merkel liked to say. That's what Americans are like. Trump is business as usual, doubly so. In other words, he keeps turning everything into a money issue. Again, take the Tomahawk deal for Germany. Biden wanted to supply them for free, but Trump managed to get the Germans to say, okay, we'll buy them. And Merz announced that they made a deal, that the Tomahawks will be in Germany after all, but Germany will be buying them. This might even be better for Germany because if they're purchased, it means they can decide for themselves when and how to use them. And it's not like the decision will be made only by the American army. So once again, I emphasize you always need to look at the documentation. The documentation comes down to two things. Here is the NATO 3.0 concept, which is that the Americans are shifting their focus to the Indo-Pacific region, but they are not leaving Europe. They are giving Europe a kind of transition period so it can gradually take over its own defense. Again, we don't see a total withdrawal of Americans from Europe. There's no need to panic and ask what to do because Europe still needs a few more years to rearm. The Americans have already left. The Americans haven't gone anywhere yet. Well, they haven't left. That also needs to be acknowledged. The same goes for the restructuring of airborne early warning aircraft. It's not happening right now. It's already known that the Europeans have ordered 10 such aircraft for now. The 10 AWACS planes will remain American. As I understand it, until those 10 new planes are produced in Sweden, only then will the replacement happen. That's what I see. And then there's the second document. Again, I always come back to this. The decision of the United States Congress, lobbied by the current Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, that the threshold for the American army in Europe is 76,000 soldiers. And again, we need to be objective. What we see is a rollback in numbers. Why did this happen? Until 2022, there were 76,000. Then, after 2022, when Russia launched a full-scale attack on Ukraine, this number increased sharply. And Trump is now simply trying to return to that mark. One more thing, pay attention to the fact that Trump always uses this topic as a bargaining chip. When Trump starts talking once again about how he's going to withdraw, he's going to abandon, and so on, always look at what's happening in the economy as well. Recently, in this context, Alexei, if you pay attention.
Alexei, we're a bit short on time, so I'd like to wrap things up now.
Yes.
Yes, well, basically, if we sum it up, yes, if we draw the line, overall, we rate the NATO summit positively.
I think yes, a positive for Europe and definitely for Ukraine. There was no tragedy, and it's very important that Turkey is also, it's clear to us that Turkey is fully on the side of Europe, and Recep Tayyip Erdogan is no longer playing both sides. Of course, he is not completely cutting ties with Moscow, but nevertheless, he is giving up the S-400 and taking the F-35. This is a great indicator for Europe. It's a controversial issue for Israel and for the situation in the Middle East, but we're not getting into that. We're talking about NATO.
Yes, today at the end, we'll have a topic about the escalation in the Middle East. Thank you very much for joining our broadcast.
Thank you.
Goodbye.